right. Hey, class. Welcome back. We are going to start our new text set this week over Tall Tales. And our story today is over Paul Bunyan. This book is a tall tale that was retold and illustrated by Stephen Kellogg. Here is our front cover. Okay, there's also another small picture in the back of when Paul Bunyan was a little boy. Pretty interesting photo there because he's holding a cow. So, what do you think about stories where characters do unbelievable things, like ride a tornado or pick up a cow when they're a kid? What do you think about those types of stories? So, stories that include such extreme and sometimes humorous exaggerations, these are called tall tales. Okay, they're exaggerated, they are definitely not real and could never happen in real life, but they are fun to read and silly and memorable for sure. So, tall tales often include characters with superhuman abilities. So, be looking for those superhuman abilities in the stories that we read this week. Okay, so today's story, Paul Bunyan, like I said before, it's a tall tale. Americans have been retelling for, since the settlers began arriving in the Midwest. So this is a very, very old story. There have been many different retellings of this story. So let's read this version by Stephen Kellogg. All right. The first photo. Paul Bunyan, a tall tale retold and illustrated by Stephen Kellogg. There's some really nice illustrations. Okay, here we go. Paul Bunyan was the largest, smartest, and strongest baby ever born in the state of Maine. Even before he learned to talk, Paul showed an interest in the family logging business. He took the lumber wagon and wandered through the neighborhood collecting trees. Look at the illustrations on these pages. What do they tell you about Paul that the words do not? Look at his size. He's rather large, isn't he? I think that's what they're trying to get us to understand. All right. There were so many complaints about Paul's visits that his parents anchored his cradle in the harbor. All was well until Paul started rocking the cradle and stirring up the waves. After his parents had paid for the damage, they decided to move to the backwoods where life would be more peaceful. How would the backwoods be more peaceful? And why is the Bunyan family really moving? I know that living out in the woods, it tends to be more peaceful because there aren't a whole lot of people around. But I think they're moving for a different reason. I know that they probably noticed that their son isn't like the other kids around town, and they don't want him to be treated differently, so they'd rather just kind of, head on out, right? All right. Paul loved his new wilderness home. He soon grew into a sturdy lad who was so quick on his feet he could blow out a candle and leap into bed before the room became dark. Every day he joined his forest friends in their sports. He raced with the deer and wrestled with the grizzlies. One morning, Paul awoke to find the world under a blanket of blue snow. He heard a moan from inside the snowdrift, and there he found a shivering ox calf. Paul adopted him and named him Babe. Both Paul and Babe began growing at an astonishing rate, but the ox never lost the color of the snow from which he'd been rescued. As the years passed, the two of them proved to be extremely helpful in the family business. At 17, Paul grew a fine beard which he combed with the top of a pine cone. By this time, other settlers were beginning to crowd into the Maine woods. Paul felt an urge to move on. He said goodbye to his parents and headed west. Paul wanted to cross the country with the best lumbering crew available. He hired um, a celebrated blacksmith and two famous cooks, Sourdough Slim and Cream Puff Fatty. Then he signed up legendary lumbermen like Big Tim Burr, Hardjaw Murphy, and um, seven Hackett brothers. So there they are, all the brothers, the cooks. They had some silly names, didn't they? All right, here's the next one. Paul put the camp building on wheels so that Babe could haul them from one forest to another. As soon as he had cleared the land, pioneers moved in to set up farms and villages. On the far slopes of the Appalachian Mountains, several of Paul's men were ambushed by a gang of underground ogres called Gumbergoos. Paul grabbed the camp dinner horn and blew a thunderous note into the Gumbergoose cave, determined to blast the meanness right out of them. Oops, there they are. They don't look very nice, do they? Look nasty. To Paul's dismay, the Gumbergoose responded by snatching the entire crew. A wild rough and tumble rumpus began inside the den. When the historic tussle was over, the Gumbergoos needed 6 weeks to untangle themselves. They disappeared into the depths of the earth, and they've never been heard from since. Paul's next job was to clear the heavily forested Midwest. He hired armies of extra woodmen and built enormous new bunkhouses. The men sailed up the wood The men sailed up to bed in balloons and parachuted down to breakfast in the morning. Unfortunately, the cooks couldn't flip flapjacks fast enough to satisfy all of the newcomers. It's a lot of new workers they have there. To solve the muddle, Paul built a colossal flapjack griddle. The surface was greased by kitchen helpers with slabs of bacon laced to their feet. Oh my gosh. Look at that. There's bacon underneath their feet. And since they're so tiny compared to um, huge, um, our big guy, Paul Bunyan, I just think that's awesome. So funny. Every time the hot griddle was flooded with batter, it blasted a delicious flapjack high above the clouds. Usually the flapjacks landed neatly beside the griddle, but sometimes they were a bit off target. Well, so here's one that was off target, and there's the other ones that are landing perfectly on the stack. Paul took a few days off to dig the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes so that barges of Vermont maple syrup could be brought to camp. Fueled by the powerful mixture of flapjacks and syrup, the men leveled the Great Plains and shaved the slopes of the Rocky Mountains. They probably would have sawed the peaks themselves into logs if a blizzard hadn't suddenly buried the entire mountain range. That blizzard continued for several years, snuffing out the springs, summers, and autumns. The crew burrowed into their bunkhouses and hibernated. Babe became so depressed that Paul asked Ole um, to make a pair of sunglasses for his friends. When Babe saw the world colored green, he thought he'd stumble into a field of clover. He began eating the snow with such gusto that soon the treetops reappeared. Okay, so what do you think Paul's solutions for housing and feeding his enormous crew of lumberjacks what do you think about his solution to feed them all huge pancakes? So let's see. So it's obvious that our lumberjack has superhuman strength, right? What do you think about his problem solving strategies? Do you think he does a decent job, or is he kind of out there in the brain? Kind of wild, right? Yeah. Okay. At that point, all those pent up springtimes simply exploded, dissolving the storm clouds and the remaining snow. Paul and his friends invited some newly arrived settlers to join them in a celebration of all the holidays that had been missed. Aw, that's so sweet. So you see like Christmas and Thanksgiving. Aw, so sweet. Lots of different holidays being celebrated here. Okay. After the festival, the lumberjacks continued their journey, but as they headed southwest, the blistering sun and the giant Texas varmints proved to be more of a problem than they had expected. Travel became so difficult that some of the men began to speak longingly of being buried by a blizzard or bear hugged by a gumbergoo. While crossing Arizona, the griddle curled up like a burned leaf, and the batter evaporated. Deprived of their lumberjacks, the lumbermen became weak and discouraged. Paul's great axe fell from his shoulder, gouging a jagged trench, which today is known as the Grand Canyon. Wow, that's so cool. Okay, so let's keep going here. So it's crazy how his superhuman strength and the fact that he had a ginormous, what was that thing called? An axe, right? Uh, when he was walking, you see that? As he's walking, he's dragging it because he's not very happy. And supposedly, um, when he drug it, it created the huge Grand Canyon that we have today. Definitely exaggerated, definitely fake, but kind of funny to think of. All right, disaster seemed certain until Paul came up with a desperate plan. He headed east and found a family that could sell him a barn filled with corn. Babe galloped it. Babe galloped it back across the desert. When the flaming sunrise hit the barn, it exploded, and the lumbermen awoke to find themselves in a raging blizzard of popcorn. Dizzy with joy, they pulled on their mittens and began blasting each other with popcorn balls. So it exploded, and they have so much popcorn. Okay, here's the next page. A westerly wind kept the cooling clouds of popcorn swirling around Paul and his crew until they crossed California and reached the Pacific Ocean. There he is picking up a big whale. All right. So after he had crossed the country, some say that Paul gave up lumbering and rambling north, researching for new areas of untouched wilderness. With the passing years, Paul had been seen less and less frequently. However, along with his unusual size and strength, he seems to possess an extraordinary longevity. Sometimes his great bursts of laughter can be heard rumbling like distant thunder across the wild Alaskan mountain ranges where he and Babe still roam. The end. All right. Well, wasn't that such an exaggerated story? I'm sure you could count way more than five things that were so exaggerated. I want you to think right now what were at least five things that were totally exaggerated, totally false, could never happen in real life, that you thought were funny, interesting, or just like all out crazy. So think about those things, share those with somebody at your house today. And I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to another story. Bye, guys.